You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some surprise news here. It looks like Donald Trump is now contending with a brand new lawsuit against him. I don't think anybody saw this coming. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, shocking that Donald Trump is being sued for defamation yet again for lies he told. So this one involves a group of men who, we know as the Central Park Five. That is the name they have carried since 1989 when they were wrongfully accused of a sexual assault in Central Park. They then went to trial, all pleading not guilty. They were convicted at trial based in part on some coerced confessions, but they were actually not guilty of the crime. They went on to be fully exonerated. In fact, they sued both the city of New York and the state of New York, and they settled for a combined $45 million. So these five men were wrongfully accused, wrongfully convicted, and fully exonerated. But what did Donald Trump do at the debate with Kamala Harris? He said the Central Park Five not only were guilty, but they pleaded guilty at trial. Nothing could be further from the truth. That is an obvious lie, a reckless lie, an intentional lie. So the Central Park Five, I'm sorry, I don't have all of their names sort of on the tip of my tongue, but they have now brought a defamation lawsuit in Pennsylvania against Donald Trump. And boy, it's really hard to see how, on the evidence and understanding the elements of defamation, what they would have to prove to hold Donald Trump accountable and recover money damages for him lying about and defaming them. Really hard to see how they don't win that lawsuit.
That's what I was going to ask, is that I know that for public figures like Donald Trump would be, the bar to prove defamation is extraordinarily high. Does it seem like these guys have enough evidence to basically clear that bar in their upcoming litigation against him?
Yeah, based on the public reporting, it sure looks like they have enough evidence. And you're exactly right. Defamation applies differently if it involves a public figure or a private figure. But let's just quickly tick through the four elements. That is the four things the person who has sued for defamation has to prove if he or she is going to recover damages. First, that a false statement was made. Well, inarguably, Donald Trump made a false statement, and to one of the widest possible audiences during a presidential debate. He said that they pleaded guilty at trial. And nothing could be further from the truth. Not only did they plead not guilty, Brian, they maintained their innocence throughout their lengthy period of incarceration. In fact, there's some reporting that had they accepted responsibility and falsely said, okay, I admit my guilt, they could have been released even earlier from prison than they were, but they wouldn't. They would not falsely, indicate that they committed a crime they did not commit. So it was plainly a lie. He also went on to say not only did they plead guilty at trial, but that they killed the victim. And I guess I'm happy to report the victim is still alive and survived the sexual assault attack, which by all accounts was brutal. But somebody else has been proven by DNA evidence to have committed that crime, not any member of the Central Park Five. So first, false statement, check. Second, that false statement has to be published or communicated to a third party. Check, because Donald Trump, published it and communicated it to the widest possible audience during a presidential debate. And then the third element, we have to split into two separate parts. The third element is basically the mental state, or what the person making the false statements sort of needed to be thinking at the time he made them. If you're a public figure, you have to prove malice. That's a fancy word for Donald Trump knowing what he said was false or recklessly disregarding the truth or falsity of what he was saying. Talk about reckless disregard. It has been reported for decades that the Central Park Five were fully exonerated, did not commit the crime, and did not plead guilty at trial. So, even for a public figure, and I'll hasten to add, at least one of the Central Park Five went on to be elected to New York City Council. So he is probably a public figure. So he will have that higher burden of proof. I'm not sure what the other four members of the Central Park Five are doing, whether they're public figures or not. But let's drop down. If you're not a public figure and somebody tells a lie about you, but rather you're a private person, then the bar is lowered to simple negligence when you're telling the lie. What does that mean? It means you failed to take reasonable care before you made this assertion about somebody else as to whether it was true or it was false. So then the fourth element is damages. In other words, there had to be some damage, monetary damage, pain and suffering. Your reputation suffers as a result of a former president and a current presidential candidate disseminating to the widest possible audience that y'all pled guilty at trial when nothing could be further from the truth. These 5 men suffered damages, and I have a feeling they will win their defamation suit. Nothing is a sure thing, but it seems like a very strong cause of action. And, the sky's the limit as to, how much they suffered as a result of this lie that Donald Trump blasted out to an international audience.
Glenn, obviously Donald Trump has had some issues lately contending with his various defamation suits, most famously the one against E. Jean Carroll. I believe the first one had damages of $5 million and the second one had damages in the ballpark of $83 million. Does the fact that he has defamed someone else so publicly and knowingly, does that have any impact on the pending litigation that the Central Park Five is engaged in that they can say, look, this is somebody who has a history of disregarding rulings surrounding defamation, and so we really have to pick a number with regard to damages that we know will make him actually listen and not defame us further?
Yeah, let me give you a definitive answer to that question, and the definitive answer is maybe. Why? Because it is up to the judge to rule on whether what we call other acts of uncharged misconduct are admissible in the present trial. We call that 404B evidence. That's a shorthand for the rule of evidence that says, you know what? Even if you're not charged with it in this case, or even if it's not part of the civil suit that's been brought, if you did something similar previously in unrelated circumstances, perhaps lied about other people, if the judge rules that it's admissible to show that you have a pattern, you have a habit, right? It can go to knock down a claim of just an honest mistake. Well, no, think about it in these terms. If somebody's on trial for robbing a bank and they robbed a bank 4 times previously, even though those charges were not part of the current bank robbery charge, a judge might very well rule, you know what? The jury gets to hear about your 4 other bank robberies because you have a pattern, a proven pattern, and those other robberies, bank robberies, become relevant to the charged offense, whether you robbed the bank the 5th time. So that's why I have to say maybe, because it's really up to the ruling of the trial court judge as to whether to allow into evidence in the Central Park 5 case his lies, repeated lies, unapologetic lies, defamatory lies that he kept making about E. Jean Carroll.
But does it lend itself to reason, for example, that if in the E. Jean Carroll case they started with a $5 million floor in terms of his damages, and that obviously did nothing to deter him from making these defamatory claims about her, and then they bumped it up to $83 million, that in the Central Park 5 case, they could simply say, look, we already know based on previous acts by him, based on this precedent that he himself has set with these defamation cases, that $5 million ain't going to do the trick. And so if we want to make sure that we're protected from his defamatory claims, that we have to start off, our floor has to be closer to that $83 million number as opposed to the 5.
Yeah, Brian, that's a great question, but here's the thing. Damage awards in other unrelated cases are generally not going to be admissible or relevant in a new defamation case, based on what Donald Trump just said about the Central Park 5. It's a great common sense argument that, you need to bang him out for a huge money damages award, ladies and gentlemen, of the jury, because the one thing we know about Donald Trump is he never backs down, right? He will redouble his efforts to tell defamatory lies about people even after he has once been held accountable by a jury for defaming that person. Those are great common sense arguments. I don't suspect they would carry much weight, and I don't even think they would necessarily be admissible on the question of how much should he be made to pay if he is found to have defamed the Central Park Five.
All right, let's finish off with this. What's the timeline that we can expect with regard to this litigation moving forward?
Yeah, we're not going to see a trial anytime soon. Now they have to go through the discovery phase of the litigation. That involves interrogatories. It's a really fancy word for written questions. It involves depositions after the parties get the answers to the interrogatories. They will seek all sorts of potentially documents and emails and records. And so this is a very long process when a civil suit winds its way through civil litigation. So could we see a trial as early as sometime maybe mid-2025? It's possible, but civil suits tend to linger for quite some time.
Okay, well, we will, of course, stay on top of this, as well as the vast array of other prosecutions that Donald Trump is contending with right now. But while, of course, this won't jeopardize Trump's freedom, it may certainly jeopardize millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in his bank account. So again, we will stay on top of this. As soon as we have any updates, we'll bring them to you. For those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. That is the best way to support our work. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.